"What was your call sign, old man?" Petty Officer Ryan Cole asked, and the question cut through the SEAL briefing room like a blade through cold air. The room went quieter, not silent yet, but close enough for the hum of the fluorescent lights to become noticeable above the low breath of the air conditioning. 24 men in uniform turned their eyes toward the back wall, where an old veteran stood beneath the shadow of the folded American flag. He had entered without ceremony, without a chest full of ribbons, without a command coin flashing in his palm. Just an old navy blue jacket, polished black shoes that had seen too many sidewalks, and a scratched diver's watch strapped to his left wrist with a dark strip of worn leather. His name was Walter Mercer, though nobody in that room seemed to know it. To them, he looked like someone's grandfather who had taken a wrong turn somewhere between the front gate and the public memorial hall. The wall behind him carried the names of men who had served in places most Americans would never find on a map. Brass letters caught the blue light and threw it back in thin, sharp lines. Walter's pale eyes did not move across all the names. They stayed on one, half covered by the still edge of a hanging flag. Ryan Cole stood near the center aisle, young, broad-shouldered, and perfectly pressed, with the easy confidence of a man used to being the hardest voice in the room. He was 27, a Navy SEAL, and every inch of him announced it before he ever opened his mouth. The sleeves of his uniform sat clean against his arms. His boots were polished. His jaw was set in that modern expression of trained impatience, the look of someone who believed respect had to be earned in front of him and proved on his terms. A few of the younger operators watched Ryan with faint smiles, waiting to see how far he would take it. Others stayed still, sensing something off but not naming it yet. Walter said nothing. He simply stood there with one hand resting lightly over the old watch, thumb touching the cracked glass as if steadying a memory no one else could see. Ryan took 2 steps closer. His boots clicked on the waxed floor. "This is a restricted briefing room," he said, louder now, shaping the words for the audience. "Family visitors are down the hall. Museum displays are on the first floor. Whatever tour group you wandered away from, it isn't here." A low ripple of laughter moved through the back row and died quickly. Walter finally turned his head. His face was lined, weathered, and calm in a way that made his age feel less like weakness and more like distance. He looked at Ryan as if the young man were standing much farther away than 6 feet. "I was invited," Walter said. His voice was quiet, rough around the edges, but it carried. Ryan smiled without warmth. "Invited by who?" Walter's gaze shifted once more to the wall of names. "Someone who remembered." That answer put a small crease in Ryan's expression. Not doubt. Not yet. Irritation. He glanced toward the others, then back at the old man. "That's a nice line," he said. "But we get a lot of nice lines around here. Men who say they were there. Men who say records got lost. Men who say their missions were too secret for paperwork." He stepped close enough now that the room felt smaller. "So I'll ask you again. What was your call sign, old man?" The words landed hard. No one laughed this time. Walter's fingers tightened slightly over the diver's watch. Under the cold light, 2 faint letters could be seen carved into the leather strap, almost erased by 50 years of sweat, salt, and time. L.G. Ryan noticed them. His eyes sharpened, pleased to have found something to use. "L.G., he said, tilting his head. "Let me guess." He gave the room half a smile. "Last Grandpa?" A few men exhaled through their noses, but Chief Petty Officer Daniel Hayes did not smile. He stood near the side wall, arms folded, watching the old watch instead of the old man. Something about it bothered him. Not the letters. The strap. The make. The way Walter's hand guarded it without seeming to. Hayes had seen enough old gear in locked cabinets and forgotten photographs to know when an object was not souvenir shop history. Ryan waited for Walter to flinch, argue, explain, or leave. Walter did none of those things. He looked past Ryan again, toward the half-hidden Name on the wall, and for a moment the whole room seemed to lean toward him without meaning to. Then Walter Mercer said nothing at all. The silence after Walter's refusal to answer was not empty. It had weight. It pressed against the long conference table, against the framed photographs on the walls, against the polished floor where Ryan Cole's boots stood planted like he owned the room. Outside the narrow windows, late afternoon light lay flat across the Virginia base, turning the glass a dull silver. Inside, the air stayed cold, filtered, controlled. It smelled faintly of floor wax, old paper, and coffee that had been sitting too long in a stainless steel urn near the door. Walter Mercer stood in the same place, small beneath the high ceiling, one hand still resting over the scratched face of his diver's watch. He did not look embarrassed. He did not look angry. That was what bothered Ryan most. The old man had absorbed the joke without giving the room the satisfaction of seeing it land. Men like Ryan understood resistance. They understood excuses. They understood loud pride and false stories. But they did not know what to do with stillness. Ryan gave a short laugh, more for himself than anyone else. "You hear that?" he said, turning slightly toward the younger operators. "No unit. No years. No call sign. Just mystery." A few men shifted in their seats. The laughter from earlier did not return with the same ease. Walter's presence had changed the room in a way nobody wanted to admit. He looked too ordinary to command attention, yet every eye kept drifting back to him. His jacket hung loose on his narrow shoulders. A clean white shirt showed at the collar. His trousers were pressed but old, the crease softened by years of careful wearing. His shoes had been polished by hand, not by habit of vanity, but by the old discipline of a man who still believed appearance was a form of respect. On his left hand, the skin was pale and thin, mapped with veins, but the fingers rested with strange precision, thumb over the watch glass, two fingers along the leather strap, as if he were holding a compass against a storm only he could feel. "I said I was invited," Walter repeated. His voice stayed low. It did not rise to meet Ryan's challenge. It did not beg the room to believe him. That calm made the words heavier. Ryan stepped closer, stopping just outside arm's reach. "By someone who remembered," he said, mocking the phrase with a soft, theatrical nod. "That is good. Real dramatic. But this is not a veteran's breakfast at the county hall. This is naval special warfare. You do not walk into this room because somebody remembered you from 1960 whatever." Chief Petty Officer Daniel Hayes watched from the side wall, his face unreadable. He had served long enough to hear every kind of lie a man could tell about who he had been. Walter Mercer did not sound like any of them. Liars filled silence because they feared it. This old man let silence work for him. Hayes looked again at the watch. The case was old stainless steel, brushed nearly smooth at the edges. The crystal carried a long diagonal scar. Not decoration. Not costume. The strap had been replaced long ago with dark leather, but the buckle was military issue, the kind that appeared in grainy training photographs from another era. The letters L and G sat near the underside of the wrist, almost hidden, cut by hand instead of stamped. Ryan noticed Hayes staring and mistook the attention for permission. He leaned slightly toward Walter's wrist. "So what does it stand for?" he asked. "Little ghost? Lost guy? Lucky grandpa?" The words drew one nervous chuckle from the back of the room, then nothing. Walter's eyes moved to Ryan's hand before Ryan even reached for the strap. It was only a glance, but Hayes saw it and straightened a fraction. The movement was small. Controlled. Warning without threat. Ryan missed it. He was too deep in the performance now, too aware of the young faces watching him, too committed to proving that the old man in the back was nobody. "Come on," Ryan said. "You walked into our room. You can answer one simple question." Walter looked at him for a long moment. The blue light from the wall screens cut across the lines of his face, deepening every crease until he seemed carved from weathered stone. Some names, Walter said, were not meant to survive. The mission. The room went still enough for the clock above the door to be heard. 1 second. 2. 3. Ryan's smile tightened. He did not like the way that sentence landed. He did not like the way the men stopped shifting. He did not like the way Chief Hayes had gone from curious to alert. So Ryan did the thing pride often does when it feels the floor give way beneath it. He pushed harder. Then maybe they should stay buried, he said. Walter's expression did not change, but his thumb moved once over the cracked glass of the watch, slow and careful, like a man touching a grave marker in the dark. Ryan's words stayed in the air longer than he expected. Maybe they should stay buried. He had meant it as a final jab, the kind of remark that usually ended a challenge before it became inconvenient. But the sentence did not end anything. It opened something. Walter Mercer's thumb rested on the cracked glass of the old watch, and for the first time since he had entered the briefing room, his breathing changed. Not enough for most of the men to notice. Just a slow draw of air through the nose, a measured pause, then a quiet release. Chief Hayes noticed. He had seen that kind of pause before in men who carried memories carefully because careless handling could break more than silence. Ryan folded his arms. Here is how this works, he said. You give me a unit, a date, a commanding officer, anything that checks out, and maybe I believe you were invited. You keep talking like some classified campfire story, and I walk you out myself. Walter looked at the table. Along its polished surface sat briefing folders, sealed envelopes, black pens aligned beside ceramic mugs, a row of phones turned face down. Modern order. Modern certainty. Everything labeled. Everything tracked. Everything built for a world that believed every truth lived in a database somewhere. Walter had once known a different kind of record. Names scratched into wet paper. Coordinates whispered once and never repeated. Men remembered by the sound of their breathing in the dark. He lifted his eyes to Ryan. You want paperwork for a ghost, he said. The room held still. Ryan's jaw flexed. I want proof. No, Walter said softly. You want permission to disrespect what you do not understand. A few heads turned. Not toward Walter, but toward Ryan, measuring the change in temperature. Ryan felt it and pushed his shoulders back. He had made a career out of not backing down in front of a room. Respect is not automatic, he said. Not here. Walter nodded once, almost approving. No. It is not. That answer took some of the force out of Ryan's posture. It was not surrender. It was agreement, and somehow that made the old man harder to dismiss. Ryan glanced again at the watch, at the faint letters carved into the leather. L and G. 2 small marks nearly swallowed by age. Then earn it, Ryan said. Tell us what those letters mean. Walter's hand did not move. His gaze drifted past Ryan again, toward the wall of fallen names. The flag edge trembled slightly as the ventilation system breathed from the ceiling. For a second, the cloth lifted just enough to reveal more of the brass letters beneath it. Hayes saw Walter's eyes lock there. Not on the wall as a whole. On one name. Lieutenant Aaron Whitaker. Hayes felt something cold run along the back of his neck. Whitaker was not a common name in that building. Not with Admiral Thomas Whitaker scheduled to address the memorial in less than an hour. Ryan did not see the connection. He saw only an old man refusing to perform. You know what I think? Ryan said. I think you heard stories. Maybe you knew a guy who knew a guy. Maybe you found that watch in a drawer. Maybe the initials make people ask questions, and you enjoy the mystery. Walter turned back to him. The old man's eyes were pale, clear, and terribly patient. Mystery is for men who want attention, he said. Silence is for men who paid for it. No one laughed now. Even the youngest operator near the coffee urn lowered his eyes for a moment, as if the sentence had crossed the room and placed a hand on his shoulder. Ryan's face tightened. Pride had led him this far, and pride rarely knows when the road ends. He reached toward the leather strap, not to hurt, not even to pull, but to point at the letters as if they were evidence in a trial he intended to win. His fingertip stopped less than an inch from the watch. Walter's hand closed over it, calm and firm, not grabbing Ryan, not threatening him, simply shielding the object from being touched. The room seemed to inhale. Walter's voice dropped so low that everyone leaned in to hear it. "Do not make a joke out of the last thing they gave me." Hayes uncrossed his arms. Something inside him had just moved from suspicion to certainty. Ryan stared at Walter's hand, then at his face. For one brief second, the young SEAL looked less angry than unsure. Then the door seal hissed softly behind them as the air system shifted, and the briefing room returned to its cold mechanical hum. Walter released his hand from the watch, but his eyes remained on Ryan. "You asked for a call sign," he said. "You are not ready to hear it." The words did not make Ryan step back. They should have. Somewhere under the pride, under the training, under the clean uniform and the eyes of every man in that room, a wiser part of him understood that he had reached the edge of something old and sealed. But Ryan Cole was 27 years old, and the hardest lessons in his life had always come with instructors, scorecards, and rules he could master. This old man offered none of that. Walter Mercer stood there with his thin hand over a cracked watch and spoke like the room belonged to the past. Ryan could not allow that. Not in front of his team. Not in a place where names had to mean something. He gave a short nod, as if he had reached a decision. "Then maybe I am not the one with the problem," he said. "Maybe you are just another man hiding behind a story because the truth is smaller than the legend." The sentence landed flat. Even Ryan heard it. The briefing room had stopped being his audience. The men were no longer waiting for him to win. They were waiting for him to stop. Chief Hayes took one slow step away from the wall. "Ryan," he said, voice low. "Let it go." Ryan turned his head just enough to show he had heard, but not enough to obey. "With respect, Chief, I am making sure a restricted room stays restricted." Hayes did not blink. "That is not what you are doing." The clock above the door clicked once. The ventilation whispered through the ceiling grates. Outside, somewhere beyond the reinforced glass, a distant vehicle rolled across the base road, its engine fading into the afternoon. Walter remained still, but his eyes had changed. Not sharper. Farther away. As if the room had become a thin layer over another place. Ryan saw the shift and mistook it for weakness. He pointed again at the watch, careful not to touch it this time. "Then tell us what they gave you," he said. "Those letters. That strap. That little piece of museum leather you are guarding like it is the crown jewels." Walter's gaze lowered to the watch. The old diver's case caught the blue light and threw back a broken line across his knuckles. The glass was scarred from one edge to the other, a pale diagonal mark that no polishing could erase. The leather strap had darkened with age until it looked almost black, but near the buckle the carved letters were still visible. L and G, rough. Uneven. Cut by someone without tools meant for engraving. Walter's thumb passed over them once. The room dissolved around the edges. The coffee smell thinned. The floor wax vanished. The cold air of the briefing room became wet salt air in his memory. He was young again, standing on the deck of a darkened Navy vessel, 50 miles from a shoreline no one was supposed to name. No moon. No ceremony. No speeches. Just red lights under steel, quiet faces, and the low pulse of engines held under restraint. A lieutenant beside him, Aaron Whitaker, checked his watch with hands that were steady only because pride forced them to be. He was younger than Walter by 2 years and carried the weight of men who trusted him. Around them, the team moved without wasting words. They were not heroes in that moment. They were silhouettes, each one made smaller by the size of the night waiting beyond the rail. Someone handed Walter the watch strap before they went over. A strip of leather, cut from an old dive bag, initials carved in with the tip of a pocketknife. "Last ghost," one of the men had whispered, not laughing. "You always come back last." Walter remembered the weight of it being tied around his wrist. He remembered the smell of diesel, salt, and rain. He remembered Aaron Whitaker looking at him and saying, "If anything goes wrong, Mercer, get them home." The memory tightened, then faded. The briefing room returned piece by piece. Blue lights. Brass names. Ryan's face. The men watching. Walter looked down at the strap as if it had grown heavier in the few seconds he had been gone. "It was not a decoration," he said. "It was a promise." Hayes heard the change in his voice and felt his own breath slow. Ryan heard it too, but he had no place left to put his doubt. "A promise to who?" he asked. Walter lifted his eyes toward the half-covered name on the wall. "To men who were not allowed to exist," he said. "And to the one who did." Walter Mercer's eyes stayed on the name half hidden behind the flag, and for a moment no one in the briefing room seemed willing to breathe too loudly. Lieutenant Aaron Whitaker. The brass letters were clean, polished, official. They gave the illusion that history had been settled, filed, and honored properly. Walter knew better. Some history was not placed on walls. Some of it was folded into sealed envelopes, locked behind doors, and left to grow old inside the men who survived it. Ryan followed Walter's gaze and finally noticed the name. His expression shifted, just a fraction. The confidence did not leave him, but it lost its edge. He knew the last name. Everyone on that base knew it. Admiral Thomas Whitaker was scheduled to speak at the memorial ceremony before sunset, and no one in naval special warfare said that name carelessly. Ryan looked back at Walter. "You knew Lieutenant Whitaker?" The question came out smaller than he intended. Walter did not answer at once. His fingers rested over the old leather strap, and the room around him began to thin again, not disappearing, only bending under the pressure of memory. The blue lights above the briefing table became red ship lights under steel beams. The hum of the air conditioning became the low vibration of engines held quiet in dark water. He could smell salt, oil, damp canvas, and the metallic bite of old equipment. He could feel the cold weight of the watch against his wrist, newly tied, the leather still stiff. He was 22 years old again, standing shoulder to shoulder with men whose names would never be printed in the right places. They were 20 miles off a hostile coast, though the map would later say they had never been there. Their orders were simple on paper and impossible in the body. Go in unseen. Find the missing aviators. Bring home anyone still breathing. Leave no trace that the United States had ever touched that shore. Aaron Whitaker stood beside him, young, focused, and too serious for his age. He had the kind of face that tried to hide fear by becoming useful. Walter respected that. Fear was not weakness. Fear was information. The men checked their gear in silence because silence had already become part of the mission. No jokes. No swagger. No speeches about glory. Just hands moving with practiced care, buckles secured, watches synchronized, signals reviewed one last time under a red lamp that made every face look carved from dark copper. Before they stepped into the water, one of the older men tied the leather strap around Walter's wrist and tugged the knot tight. "Last ghost," he whispered. "Not a nickname for fun. Not a badge. A fact." Walter always took the rear position. Walter counted heads in the dark. Walter was the last shape seen before the sea swallowed the team and the first hand a man felt when panic tried to pull him under. Aaron Whitaker looked at the strap, then at Walter. "If the night turns bad, Mercer," he said quietly, "you get them back." Walter remembered nodding. Not because he was brave. Because someone had to carry the promise. The memory moved forward in fragments safe enough to survive the telling. Black water closing over his shoulders. Rain dimpling the surface. A shoreline without lights. Men moving like shadows through reeds and mud. A small signal flashed twice in the distance, then vanished. No explosions in his memory now, no loud chaos, only tension so tight it seemed to hold the world still. They found the aviators in a place that smelled of wet wood and fear, men exhausted but alive, men who understood without being told that noise could cost everything. Then the plan broke. As plans often did when they met the real world. A patrol changed direction. A radio failed. The tide moved faster than expected. Aaron Whitaker slipped while helping one of the aviators across a flooded ditch, twisting his leg badly enough that he could no longer move without support. He did not complain. He tried to order Walter to leave him. Walter remembered the young lieutenant's hand gripping his sleeve, remembered the words spoken through clenched teeth. Get the others out. That is an order. Walter had looked at the black line of trees, then at the water route home, then at the faces waiting for him. He did not argue. He simply placed Aaron's arm over his shoulder and said, "Not tonight, sir." The memory closed there, mercifully, like a door pulled shut before the room beyond could be seen. Walter returned to the briefing room with the same quiet face, but his hand had tightened around the watch. Ryan was watching him differently now. So was everyone else. Walter looked at the name on the wall and said, Lieutenant Whitaker was supposed to become a memory that night. Instead, he became a witness. Chief Petty Officer Daniel Hayes moved before anyone else understood why. He did not rush. Rushing made people look guilty. He simply unfolded his arms, turned from the wall, and walked toward the side door with the careful pace of a man who had decided the room no longer held the most important part of the problem. Ryan saw him go and frowned. Chief. Hayes did not stop. He opened the door just enough to slip into the hallway, and the sealed edge whispered shut behind him. The corridor outside the briefing room was colder and brighter, lined with framed command photographs, emergency lights, and polished tile that reflected every overhead panel in long white strips. Hayes paused beside a glass case filled with old challenge coins and stared through it without seeing any of them. His pulse was steady, but something deeper had begun to move. Walter Mercer's words had not sounded like a story. They had sounded like a man stepping around classified ground because even after 50 years, he still knew where not to place his foot. Hayes took out his phone, unlocked it, and scrolled to a number he had not used in 6 months. Naval Special Warfare Command did not appreciate curiosity. It appreciated channels, forms, and need to know. But Hayes had spent 24 years learning that the most dangerous mistakes often began when young men confused clean records with complete truth. The line rang twice. A clipped voice answered. Command Duty Office. This is Chief Petty Officer Daniel Hayes at Little Creek, Hayes said. I need a historical verification on a possible legacy guest in a restricted memorial space. There was a small pause, the kind made by someone deciding whether annoyance was worth the paperwork. Name. Walter Mercer, Hayes said. White male, approximately 84, claims invitation connection to Lieutenant Aaron Whitaker. Nothing moved on the other end for a moment except distant keyboard clicks. Then the voice returned, flat. No active clearance. No current visitor credential in that name. Hayes looked down the corridor toward the closed briefing room door. Inside, he could faintly hear Ryan's voice, lower now but still edged with pride. Check deeper, Hayes said. Older files. Naval advisory periods. Late 1960s. The duty officer exhaled through his nose. Chief, we do not run ghost hunts because someone walked into the wrong room. Hayes's eyes shifted to the glass case. In the reflection, his own face looked older than it had that morning. He has an old Navy diver watch, Hayes said. Hand-cut leather strap. Initials L and G. The keyboard stopped. It was not dramatic. No music rose. No alarm sounded in the hallway. But the silence on the line changed shape so completely that Hayes felt his shoulders tighten. "Say that again," the duty officer said. Hayes spoke slowly. "Initials L and G, possible call sign connection." "Old man will not say it in the room." Another pause. Longer this time. Then a second voice came onto the line, older, sharper, stripped of all boredom. "Chief Hayes, this is Commander Alvarez. Where exactly is the individual now?" "Briefing room 2, Hayes said. "Memorial wall side. Petty Officer Cole is questioning him." Commander Alvarez did not respond immediately. Hayes heard murmuring away from the receiver, then a rapid sequence of keys, then one short phrase spoken too far from the phone to be meant for him. "Flag access only." Hayes straightened. "Commander? Do not let that man leave," Alvarez said. "And do not allow anyone to touch that watch." Hayes felt the corridor shrink around him. "Sir, who is he?" The answer did not come. Instead, another set of keys clicked faster, then stopped all at once. When Alvarez returned, his voice had lost its command polish and gained something close to disbelief. "I am staring at a black archive prompt that has not been opened in 11 years. It is rejecting my credentials." Hayes turned his head toward the briefing room door. Through the small rectangular window, he could see Walter standing exactly where he had been, quiet beneath the blue light, while Ryan stood in front of him like a man arguing with a locked vault. Hayes lowered his voice. "What does the prompt say?" The line carried only breathing for 2 seconds. Then Commander Alvarez read the words carefully, as if saying them too loud might wake something buried under the building itself. "Last ghost. Admiral access required." Inside briefing room 2, Ryan Cole had begun to understand that the room was slipping away from him, and that made him speak with more force than confidence. Walter Mercer had not moved from the memorial wall. He stood beneath the cold blue lights with his old watch covered by one thin hand, looking less like an intruder now and more like a man waiting for the past to finish crossing the distance. The younger operators no longer watched Ryan with amusement. Their faces had settled into a careful stillness, the kind men wear when they realize a joke has wandered too close to sacred ground. Ryan felt their doubt and mistook it for pressure to prove himself. He glanced toward the side door where Chief Hayes had disappeared, then back at Walter. The old man had said Lieutenant Whitaker became a witness. That sentence had done something to the room. It had attached Walter to a name no one in that building treated casually. Ryan could not let that stand without proof. He stepped closer, lowering his voice but sharpening every word. "You do not get to walk in here and borrow the Admiral's family name like a shield." Walter's eyes returned from the wall. "I borrowed nothing." "Then say it plainly," Ryan said. "Say what you were." Walter looked at him for a long, quiet second. Outside the sealed door, distant footsteps passed and faded. The clock above the entrance clicked forward. Somewhere in the table speaker, a tiny pulse of static came and went so softly that most of the men missed it. Walter did not. His gaze shifted to the black conference phone at the center of the table, then back to Ryan. "I was the man behind the last man," he said. Ryan frowned. "That is not an answer." It was the only answer that mattered to the men who knew. Ryan gave a humorless laugh. "There it is again. Men who knew. Missions that disappeared. Names nobody can verify." He looked toward the others now, trying to pull them back to his side. "You all hear this, right? This is exactly how stolen stories work. They are always too classified to check. Too old to prove. Too emotional to question." No one replied. A young ensign near the wall looked down at his boots. A senior petty officer at the table slowly closed the folder in front of him, as though paperwork had suddenly become disrespectful. Walter took one breath. It was steady, but it carried age, memory, and restraint. "You are right to question a man who walks into a room like this," he said. "You are wrong to enjoy humiliating him before you know what he carries." The words struck Ryan harder because they were not loud. His face tightened. He took that as a challenge, not a correction. "Then carry it in the open," he said. "Say the call sign." Walter's hand lifted from the watch. The leather strap lay exposed under the lights, the rough initials visible now to everyone close enough to see. L&G. Chief Hayes appeared behind the glass of the side door at that moment, phone pressed to his ear, face changed completely. He looked through the window at Walter, then at Ryan, and his expression carried a warning that needed no words. Ryan saw him but was already too deep in the moment. "Say it," he repeated. Walter looked past him, toward Hayes, as if he had already heard the answer traveling through the walls. Then the table speaker cracked with static. Every head turned. The old command line, patched into the room for memorial coordination, blinked red once, then twice. A voice came through, controlled but urgent. "Briefing room 2, identify the individual who used the archive designation." No one moved. Ryan stared at the speaker, all color draining from the certainty in his face. The voice came again, sharper this time. "Who said the words last, Ghost?" Walter closed his eyes for half a second, not in fear, but in recognition. When he opened them, the room had gone utterly still. He looked at Ryan Cole, and there was no anger in him. Only the quiet sorrow of a man watching youth step into history without understanding the ground beneath its feet. Ryan swallowed. For the first time since Walter had entered, he had no sentence ready. Hayes opened the side door slowly, still holding the phone, and said in a voice that carried across the room like a bell under water, "Nobody touches him. Nobody asks him another question. Command is escalating to flag level now." The words flag level changed the room more than any order Ryan Cole had ever heard. It did not sound loud. It did not need to. It moved through briefing room 2 with the clean force of a sealed door opening somewhere far above them. Chief Hayes stood just inside the side entrance, phone still in hand, his face set in a way that made even the most restless young operator sit perfectly still. The red light on the conference speaker continued to blink at the center of the table, steady as a heartbeat. Walter Mercer did not look at it. He looked at the wall, at the half-hidden brass name, as if the voice from command had only confirmed something he had hoped would remain asleep. Ryan took one small step back. No one mocked him for it. No one even looked directly at him. That made it worse. The room had not turned against him with anger. It had simply moved on without him, past his certainty, past his authority, into a layer of history he had not known existed. On the speaker, Commander Alvarez returned, his voice tighter now. "Chief Hayes, maintain the room. Admiral Whitaker has been notified." That name struck harder than the alert itself. Chairs shifted, not loudly, but with instinctive respect. Ryan's eyes went to Walter, then to the memorial wall, then back again. Lieutenant Aaron Whitaker. Admiral Thomas Whitaker. The connection stood there now, plain and terrible. Walter had not used the name for effect. He had carried it like something fragile. Hayes lowered the phone slightly. "Mr. Mercer," he said, his voice no longer official, no longer doubtful. "Sir, are you all right?" Walter gave the faintest nod. It was not reassurance. It was endurance. Ryan opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time, he seemed aware of the size of the silence he had created. Outside the briefing room, footsteps began to gather in the corridor. Not rushed at first. Controlled. Multiple sets of boots moving with purpose over polished tile. The men inside heard it and straightened. A lieutenant commander near the table stood without being told. Then another man rose. Then another. The room adjusted itself before rank even entered, like iron filings turning toward a magnet. The side door opened again, and two senior officers stepped in. They did not speak to Ryan. They did not ask who was in charge. Their eyes found Walter Mercer immediately, and something passed across their faces that looked very close to disbelief. One of them touched his earpiece and said softly, "Confirmed visual. Elderly male. Navy blue jacket. Diver watch on left wrist." The hallway beyond grew still. Then Admiral Thomas Whitaker appeared in the doorway. He was 63 years old, tall, white-haired, and dressed in service khakis that seemed almost too ordinary for the gravity he brought with him. There were stars on his collar, but no one in the room was looking at the medal. They were looking at his face. The Admiral had entered countless rooms in his career, rooms full of officers, politicians, cameras, and consequence. This time, he stopped as if the floor had vanished beneath him. His eyes locked on Walter Mercer. The years fell from his expression in pieces. Command discipline held his posture straight, but it could not hide what moved behind his eyes. Recognition. Shock. Grief. Gratitude. That had waited half a century for somewhere to go. No one said attention. No one had to. Every man in the room stood. Ryan snapped upright with them, but his movement was late, stiff, and hollow. Walter remained where he was, small beneath the blue lights, one hand resting over the old watch. Admiral Whitaker took one step into the room. Then another. The polished floor reflected his boots as he crossed the space between the present and a night no file had ever fully contained. He stopped 3 feet in front of Walter. For a moment, the Admiral could not speak. Walter looked at him calmly, but his eyes had softened. "Aaron?" he said, not loudly, not formally, but with the stunned gentleness of an old memory finding a living face. Admiral Whitaker's throat moved. "My father," he said quietly. "He told me your name only once. Then he told me never to repeat it unless the ghost came home." The phrase seemed to pass through Walter Mercer rather than stop at him. The ghost came home. For 50 years, men had spoken around that night with locked mouths and careful eyes. For 50 years, Walter had lived in the quiet spaces between official words, carrying names that could not be printed and promises that could not be saluted in daylight. Now Admiral Thomas Whitaker stood before him in briefing room 2, and every man present understood that the old veteran had not entered the wrong room. The room had been waiting for him without knowing it. Walter's gaze moved over the Admiral's face, searching through age, rank, and resemblance until he found the young lieutenant he had once carried through black water in another man's eyes. "Your father made it home," Walter said softly. "That was enough for me." Admiral Whitaker's expression tightened. He did not look ashamed, but something close to sorrow passed across his face. "It was not enough for him," he said. "He spent the rest of his life trying to find a way to put your name where it belonged. He was told the mission did not exist." Walter gave a faint nod, as if he had expected no other answer from history. "Some things were built to disappear." The Admiral looked down at the old watch, at the hand-cut leather strap, at the rough letters almost erased by salt and time. Then he stepped back 1 pace, straightened fully, and raised his right hand in a slow, exact salute. It was not ceremonial. It was not for the cameras. There were none. It was a salute paid in a cold briefing room under blue lights, witnessed by men who suddenly understood that silence could be heavier than applause. Walter did not return it immediately. His hand rested on the watch. His eyes lowered for one breath, perhaps to the men who had tied the strap around his wrist, perhaps to the young lieutenant who had survived, perhaps to all the names no wall had ever held. Then he lifted his hand and returned the salute with the careful precision of a body that remembered what age could not take. No one moved. Ryan Cole stood near the center aisle, his face pale, his posture rigid, his earlier confidence gone without noise. The Admiral lowered his hand and turned toward him. He did not raise his voice. "Petty Officer Cole," he said, "this uniform gives you authority, but it does not give you wisdom." Ryan swallowed. "Yes, sir. You questioned a man you did not know. That can be duty. You mocked what he carried. That was failure. The words struck harder because they were calm. Ryan's eyes shifted to Walter. For a moment, he looked very young. "Sir," he said, voice rough with the first honest humility he had shown all day, "I was wrong." Walter studied him, not unkindly. The room waited for judgment. Instead, the old veteran said, "Learn the difference between guarding a door and honoring what stands on the other side of it." Ryan nodded once, and this time there was no performance in it. Admiral Whitaker faced the room. "My father told me that 11 men came home because Walter Mercer refused to count himself first. The records will remain sealed. The debt will not." He looked back at Walter. "Sir, the memorial begins in 20 minutes. The front row is yours." Walter glanced toward the wall of names, then toward the door. "I did not come for a front row, Admiral. I came to make sure they were remembered." Whitaker's voice softened. "Then let us remember them properly." Walter walked toward the exit. As he passed, one chair moved. Then another. Every seal in the room stood straighter. No one clapped. No one spoke. Ryan stepped aside, eyes down, giving the old man a clear path. Walter paused beside him just long enough to say, "Do not be ashamed of being young. Be ashamed only if you stay foolish." Then he continued out. The corridor beyond seemed brighter than before. Behind him, the room remained silent, not with fear, but with respect finally returned to the man who had never asked for it. Some ghosts do not haunt the living. They protect what the living forgot.